Christopher Walken arrived at the studio wearing a long coat and quiet eyes. His energy was both electric and ancient, as if he had walked not through the parking lot but through time itself. The staff greeted him with polite unease, knowing that any interaction with Walken was unpredictable. Some called it charm, others called it chaos. He moved like a shadow in daylight, glancing at things no one else noticed. He said very little, and when he did it felt like the room had to pause and listen. Even if the words were ordinary, he was booked for a 10-minute segment. No one knew what would happen. Jimmy Kimmel was in his green room going over the cards his writers had prepared. Most of them were harmless jokes about Walken, iconic voice, strange roles and long pauses. One joke referred to him as the only man who could make a sentence last 10 minutes. Another suggested he was secretly an alien sent to observe human behavior. Jimmy smiled, rehearsing lines and making sure the tone was light but respectful. Still, he had not met Walken before and he was unsure how far to push. The producers warned him not to overstep. Walken was not a man who followed the usual playbook. The show began with laughter, applause and bright lights. Walken was introduced to roaring cheers and stepped out slowly, his expression unreadable. He walked with a sort of poetic awkwardness and sat in the chair without a word. Jimmy greeted him with enthusiasm, complimenting his career and making a light joke about how Walken seemed like he might hypnotize the audience instead of answer questions. Walken responded with a smile that did not reach his eyes, saying, "I might already be doing that." The audience laughed nervously, unsure if he was joking or warning. Jimmy launched into the first question, asking about Walken's recent indie film, a strange surreal piece about memory and bees. Walken spoke in a slow rhythm, choosing words like an artist choosing colors. He described the film as not about bees but about forgetting who you are while still moving forward. Jimmy chuckled and said, "So like life but with more honey." Walken looked at him and said, "Life without sting has no sweetness." The crowd was confused, amused, intrigued. Jimmy moved on to another question, but the rhythm was already uneven, as if they were dancing to different music. As the interview continued, Jimmy tried to get laughs, asking about Walken's legendary pauses and if he practiced those in the mirror. Walken replied that silence was a form of language most people ignored and he had no interest in editing truth to fit time slots. Jimmy made another quip, saying, "So you are basically a dramatic turtle," and the audience laughed hard, but Walken did not smile. He said flatly, "I am not slow, I am careful." Jimmy tried to laugh it off, but Walken leaned forward and said, "You joke because you are afraid of listening, not because you enjoy sound." The temperature in the room changed. The audience sensed tension rising like steam from pavement after rain. Jimmy looked at his next card, which had a joke about Walken's speech patterns sounding like a GPS with a poetry major. He hesitated, then delivered it with a grin. Walken sat still, then said softly, "You laugh at rhythm but fear stillness. What are you running from?" "Jimmy, you talk fast not because you are funny but because you cannot bear the echo." After the joke lands, the room went quiet. Jimmy blinked. The camera cut to audience members caught between confusion and fascination. Jimmy tried to pivot, asking about Walken's experience hosting Saturday Night Live and whether he missed doing comedy. Walken answered with an odd story about watching a moth crawl into a toaster and deciding that perhaps life is more performance than performance itself. Jimmy smiled awkwardly, then said that was either brilliant or nonsense. Walken replied, "Who says those two things are different?" Jimmy chuckled, but his fingers tapped nervously on the desk. He said, "Let us lighten things up," and pulled out a goofy prop from under the table, a rubber chicken wearing sunglasses, hoping to reset the energy. Walken looked at the chicken and said, "That is your solution to discomfort, not questions, not silence but plastic." He stood slowly, not angry but changed. The audience gasped slightly, sensing something was unfolding. Walken said, "You wanted me here to decorate your format. I came to speak, not to be shaped." Jimmy tried to speak, but Walken continued louder, "Every word I say is real. You drown it in laughter before it can breathe." He removed his mic and placed it on the desk with deliberate care. The studio was frozen, watching art and structure collide in real time. Walken looked at the crowd and said, "You are trained to clap at rhythms, not truths. The music plays and you dance, but no one asks who wrote the melody." Jimmy stood unsure what to do, reaching for Walken's arm in a friendly gesture. Walken pulled back slightly and said, "You do not touch mystery to explain it, you let it pass through you." Then he turned and walked off stage without looking back. The cameras tried to follow, but he moved beyond frame, out of reach. The audience remained quiet, even as stagehands moved into place for the next segment. The show went to break early. Jimmy returned with a shaky smile saying well that was something Christopher Walken. Everybody always unpredictable. The crowd gave soft applause but the mood was thick and unsure. Jimmy moved to the next guest, a pop singer who tried to joke about following Walken but it fell flat. Social media erupted in real time with clips, reposts and quotes. Some accused Jimmy of mocking a legend, others said Walken was being dramatic on purpose, others said it was the most real moment late night had produced in years. Raw, unpredictable and unfiltered. Walken team released no statements. He was seen later that night walking alone in the city, hands in pockets, eyes scanning buildings like they were ancient manuscripts. A fan approached him and asked if the whole thing was scripted. Walken smiled and said, "If I told you it was, it would not be anymore. If I told you it was not, you would not believe me anyway." The fan laughed and Walken walked on, disappearing into the shadows of an alley that smelled of old books and echoes. He left no trace except a memory and a question lingering in the minds of millions. Jimmy addressed the incident again the next night, this time without jokes. He said Walken was a genius who had the power to make rooms feel like theaters and silences feel like sermons. He admitted he might have pushed too far with the jokes but said he learned something about presence and performance that night. The audience applauded with more sincerity this time. Jimmy said sometimes the best moments are the ones you cannot rehearse. Walken gave us something we did not expect and maybe that is why it mattered more than anything else we had planned. Fans created artwork inspired by the Clash drawings of Walken standing like a prophet in a studio of noise-flooded timelines. One clip of him saying "you laugh at rhythm but fear stillness" was sampled into a lo-fi music track that went viral overnight. His quotes appeared on shirts, tattoos and murals. One street artist painted a massive image of Walken on a wall in Brooklyn with the words "not slow, just careful" beneath his eyes. Others dissected his words in blogs and essays, arguing over whether he had planned it all or simply responded in the moment with brutal honesty. Years later, media students studied the interview as a moment when entertainment and philosophy collided. Critics called it the Walken event, a moment where late-night comfort met theatrical discomfort and neither could absorb the other fully. Walken never returned to Jimmy's show, but in a rare interview he said, "I did not walk out, I walked in deeper. The world wanted a character. I gave them a mirror. What they saw was not me but what they fear when they cannot laugh." They cut that part of the interview but it lived on in whispers, recordings and tribute videos. And so the legend stayed alive, a man who walked onto a space designed to polish roughness and instead carved a crater in it. Walken did not storm off in rage. He drifted off like smoke from a fire that had no match, only friction. His presence haunted the desk, the lights, the script pages. No one prepared for truth spoken like riddles, dressed in metaphors delivered with silence between syllables. The echo of his words remained long after the applause ended, reminding everyone that sometimes television does not break when chaos walks in, sometimes it transforms.